post-apocalyptic city, Paul desperately searches the empty streets for supplies. His search is cut short when the warning sirens suddenly blare. While the air fills with screams and the sound of collapsing buildings, Paul finally reaches an isolated house in the countryside where he finds 2 abandoned infants. He picks them up gently and whispers that everything will be all right. 15 years pass. The boys Thomas and Joseph have grown into strong teenagers, living under Paul's strict but protective rules. Each day is spent scavenging for supplies and each night is spent barricaded inside. As the sun begins to set, Joseph hurriedly nails wooden boards across the windows and calls their loyal dog Rocco inside. Paul waits anxiously outside until Thomas comes running back, late as usual. Paul scolds him, warning that if he ever comes home after dark again, he'll be forbidden to leave the property. Thomas defends himself, explaining he was helping the nearby family on their farm. Later that night, as the boys play chess, Rocco begins scratching at the floorboards and whining nervously. Paul and Thomas investigate just as a violent pounding shakes the front door. Father and son push against the door with all their strength as the monster outside tries to force it open. For several tense minutes, the house shakes under the assault until at last, the creatures retreat. Thomas lashes out at Joseph for not helping, but Joseph explains that he was studying the attack instead. He noticed a pattern in the attack. The first strike lasted 10 seconds, the second 20, and the last just a single blow. He theorizes that the first was a test, the second was the real attempt, and the last was a frustrated gesture. The next morning, they examine the door and see deep claw marks carved into the wood. Paul knows it won't stand another night, so he takes the boys to gather materials to reinforce it. Paul sends the brothers to the river for more supplies, which angers Thomas, who reminds his father that he had planned to visit the farm that day. Paul refuses, saying the windows need to be reinforced and that the family's safety comes first. On the way, Thomas demands to be dropped near the farm and tells Joseph to pick him up later on the way back. While Paul finishes reinforcing the door, Thomas helps the family on their farm, though it quickly becomes clear that his true reason for visiting is Charlotte, the owner's daughter. The two clearly share feelings for one another. They wander the property together, and Charlotte shows him a tree she once tied herself to with a rope as a child so she could play without straying too far. They laugh together, inventing wild theories about what might have caused the end of the world. When it's time for Thomas to leave, Charlotte hugs him tightly, reluctant to let go. As the sun begins to set, Paul returns home, uneasy when he finds Rocco waiting outside but no sign of his sons. Meanwhile, after gathering supplies, Joseph struggles with the car, failing several times before finally managing to start it. At the same time, Thomas races across the fields to their meeting point, but he slips, tumbling into a deep crevice in the ground. When Joseph arrives at the spot, he doesn't see his brother anywhere and assumes he already left, so he drives home alone. When he explains the situation to Paul, his father orders him to get inside and lock up everything. He then takes Rocco with him and sets off into the night to search for Thomas. Inside the crack in the ground, Thomas regains consciousness, his body battered and aching from the fall. Striking a lighter, he casts a weak glow across the stone walls and sees a grotesque creature, its arms stretching unnaturally through a gap in the wall. The beast lets out a chilling scream that echoes through the cave, loud enough to be heard by Paul and Rocco nearby. Forcing himself to stay calm, Thomas pulled out a small knife. He inched forward and plunged it into the creature's hand, forcing it to recoil back into the hole. But before he could feel safe, another creature suddenly dropped from above and clamped its claws over his face. Thomas fought desperately, gasping for air, until Paul rushed in just in time, dragging the beast away and killing it on the spot. Knowing the forest is too dangerous to cross at night, they decide to remain inside the hole until daylight, blocking the entrance as best as they can. Yet soon, they hear more creatures moving through the tunnels beneath them. Paul orders Thomas and the dog to step back, and when the creatures try forcing their way up from the ground, Paul throws a flare into the opening. A violent explosion erupts, killing the monsters, but the blast engulfs Paul as well, leaving him badly injured. Meanwhile, back at the house, Joseph is alone. Strange noises ripple through the night, and he quickly comes up with a plan. He ties a rope around his chair, sits in front of the boarded front door, and pretends to be asleep. Before long, a claw pushes through a gap in the wood, probing the air as if testing him. Seeing no movement, the creature forces its way inside, but Joseph suddenly yanks the rope, triggering a trap. A cage drops from above, slamming down over the monster. Thrilled with his success, Joseph covers the cage with a sheet to keep it subdued, then finally allows himself to rest. At sunrise, worry consumed him. Paul, Thomas, and Rocco still haven't returned. He then takes the car and drives out to search. Meanwhile, Thomas has dug through the packed dirt and freed the tunnel entrance. He drags his badly injured father out of the hole. While Rocco races off following the sound of Joseph's engine, he guides Joseph back to them, and the brothers quickly lift Paul into the car and take him home. Back at the house, while tending to Paul's wounds, Thomas notices the hidden cage. He lifts the sheet and is startled when the trapped monster thrashes violently. Joseph hastily covers it again, warning that light seems to weaken them. He explains that the creature had taken only 8 seconds to get inside last night, the fastest time yet, and he was certain another one had escaped. Thomas recalls Charlotte saying the creatures rarely appear near her family's farm and suspects these new attacks are revenge. During their conversation, the creature breaks free and crawls under the bed. When it finally lunges out, Joseph restrains the beast while Thomas hacked off its head with an axe. Still desperate for answers, Joseph drags the corpse to his workshop. He dissects the corpse but uncovers nothing that explains what it truly was. Meanwhile, Thomas insists they take Paul to Charlotte's farm, where there's more space and proper medicine. They load Paul into the car and drive to the neighbor's property. As expected, Charlotte's parents hesitated. They didn't have enough medicine and refused to take in someone so badly injured. Charlotte protests, but her words carried no weight. They only agree to let Thomas stay, sending Joseph and Paul away. On the road back home, Joseph noticed sheep scattering in terror and fresh dirt mounds across the fields. The monsters were tunneling just below the surface. When he reaches the house, he spots a dirt trail running along the wall, confirming his fear that the monsters are already beneath the property. After treating Paul as best he can, he begins gathering materials in the workshop to form a new plan. He secures the windows, but while crossing the living room, he stumbles over a rug. Beneath it, he finds a hole and realizes that the creatures had already broken inside. Back at the farm, Thomas sneaks into the kitchen, still worried about his father. He searches for medicine until Charlotte catches him. She quietly gives him some medicine, and he thanked her with a hug, promising to come back. Unbeknownst to him, someone nearby overhears their exchange. Thomas runs toward the gate, but before he can leave, a worker confronts him at gunpoint, accusing him of stealing. Thomas panics, trying to explain that Charlotte gave him the medicine, but the man doesn't believe him. Other workers rush over, tie him up, and drag him into the garage. They play loud music to mask what they plan to do. Holding Thomas down, one of them prepares to shoot him in the legs, but before he could fire, the ground splits open beneath him, and he falls into the darkness. Then a monstrous creature erupts from the hole and attacks the others. Inside the farmhouse, Charlotte's parents were startled awake by unusual noises echoing through the halls. Her father lit a candle and cautiously stepped forward to investigate, but before he could make sense of it, a creature burst into the room and lunged at him. In the chaos, the candle fell to the ground, sparking a fire. Upstairs, Charlotte listened in horror as the sounds of her parents being slaughtered filled the house. When the noise finally stopped, she crept out of her room and froze at the sight of a long trail of blood across the floor. Following it with trembling steps, she eventually reached the bathroom, where she saw the creature carrying her mother's lifeless body slung over its back. Back in the garage, while the farm workers were torn apart one by one, Thomas was struggling against the ropes binding him. He eventually toppled the furniture he was tied to, snapping the wood and freeing himself. Just as a monster spotted him, ready to strike, Charlotte appeared and knocked it away. Seeing the farmhouse on fire, Charlotte told Thomas her parents were dead, and with no other refuge, they decided to run to Thomas's house. Back at the house, Joseph shoved furniture into the hole in the floor to block them temporarily, then looked at his unconscious father. Gently kissing Paul's forehead, he prepared himself for the battle ahead. Suddenly, the barricade gave way and Thomas and Charlotte burst inside. Joseph immediately asked for help and explained his plan. The group gathered fuel cans from the garage while Rocco barked restlessly, sensing the danger closing in. Together, they dragged an old freezer into the house. Thomas and Charlotte boarded up the last remaining windows while Joseph stacked furniture into a huge pile and drenched it with fuel. On top, he placed every explosive he could find and placed one of Paul's cigarettes to smolder as a makeshift fuse. The barricade over the hole began to shake violently. At the same time, another creature slithered down the chimney into Paul's room. A second beast erupted from the hole in the floor, but as it passed through a doorway, Thomas plunged his knife into its back. A third creature lunged at Charlotte, but she dropped it instantly with a gunshot. The two regrouped with Joseph, and together they pushed the freezer toward position. Suddenly, a door burst open, revealing Paul, blood-soaked but alive, having just killed the chimney creature with his bare hands. Without hesitation, he seized Charlotte's pistol and fired multiple rounds into the floor, trying to hit the creatures tunneling below, but there were too many. Paul kicked the first one, sending it crashing down and dragging others with it. Some scrambled up again, but before they could strike, Thomas, Joseph, and Charlotte cut them down, fighting as a seamless unit. The siblings and Charlotte dashed with Rocco toward the freezer, but Paul slammed the door shut behind him, staying behind to buy them time. The creatures swarmed him, and as they closed in, the smoldering cigarette finally ignited the fuel-soaked pile. The freezer was hurled across the ground, tumbling violently before finally skidding to a stop. When the dust settled, Thomas, Joseph, Charlotte, and Rocco crawled out, gasping for air. They rushed back toward the ruins, frantically searching for Paul, but instead of finding him, another monster lunged from the wreckage. They fled to the car as the flaming creature pursued them. Charlotte fired at it again and again, but the bullets did nothing. When it got dangerously close, she swung her pistol with all her strength, knocking it down long enough for them to escape. The group sped away, and after several miles, they finally stopped, stepping out into the open countryside. At dawn, they returned to the ruins of their home, but instead of rebuilding, they chose to move forward. They buried their loved ones, said their final farewells, and stood in silence. Then, with heavy hearts but a flicker of hope, Thomas, Joseph, Charlotte, and Rocco climbed into the car and drove off, determined to find new people, a safer place, and a future worth surviving for.